Boker Tov. Today's daf is daf Lamed Vav, and we'll review what we learned here at the bottom of Lamed Hem and Beis. Amar Rabbi Avo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Isur Shabbat Torah Ein Heter Mitztarf Isur Chutz Mi Isurei Nazir. And the exception to the rule is Nazir, meaning the general rule, says Rabbi Yochanan, in all Isurim is, let's say, for example, Chelev. If you ate a half a zayis of Chelev together with a half a zayis of Basar Heter, then you're not Chayv Malkus. The Torah says you're only Chayv Malkus for eating a Kezayis. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, Ein Heter Mitztarf Le'isu, with the exception of Nazir, and the Heter is not Mashlim, the Shir of Kezayis, in order to generate Malkus. However, Rabbi Yochanan at the end of Masechet Yomi holds that B'chol Yisrei Torah Chatzi Shir Asur Min HaTorah, but we're not discussing here the Isur itself, but rather the Chiv Malkus. And why is Nazir the exception to the rule? How do we derive that conclusion? Because the Torah says Kol Mishras, and the pasuk reads Kol Mishras Anovim Lo Yishteh. And what's Mishras Anovim? It means he took a pas and he soaked it in yayin. And what's the chiddush here that you're not allowed to eat the pas? I mean, for sure, it has a tam of yayin. But the chiddush is that even though the pas has only absorbed a half a zayis of yayin, nevertheless, the pas is mashlim the shir of kezayis and heter mitztarf le'isur and nazir, and therefore he gets malchus. And now we start our daf for today. Daf Lamed Vav. Zeiri Omar, Zeiri disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan at one point. And he says, Af si'or bebal taktiru. The din of heter mitztarf le'isur is not limited, according to Zeiri, to Nazir and to Nazir alone, but rather applies even in the lav of Haktorah. And that means that the Torah prohibited us to be makter on the Mizbech Sa'or, which is sort of shmarim shemachmitzin bo es habatzeik. It's a kind of a, almost like a chemical catalyst or an agent that causes fermentation and leavening. And the Torah says, Ki kol sior v'chol dvash lo saktiru mimenu ishe Hashem. And notice that the Torah adds kol sior and also says ki kol sior. And we're going to darshan both the kol and the ki kol. And what is the Torah teaching me here with the extra word? That if, let's say, you have a half a zayis of sior and a half a zayis of matzah, which of course you're allowed to be makter on the mizbeach, then the half a zayis of matzah, which is heter, is mitztarif to the half a zayis of sior, and you will get malchus for this haktorah of a half a zayis of sior together with a half a zayis of matzah. Now, according to Rashi, this situation, and this is Rashi in Psochim Daf Mem Gimel, is one in which, to quote Rashi, Eino mu'uravim zeba says l'kol echad nikar. So you did not mix the two. You have a half a zayis of sior and a half a zayis of matzah, and then you were makter them both together on the mizbeach, but each one was nikar. So there was no tarovis. Tosfos, on the other hand, is of the opinion, and I think it's here also on our daf, not only in Psachim. If you take a look at this Tosfos de Raskel Keman, and he raises objections to Rashi, and he disagrees, and he says we're talking about a case where there's a tarovis. If there's no tarovis, then heter is not mitztaref le'isa. So here we have a kasha of the Karen Ora. The Karen Ora says, according to Rashi, that there's no taroves. So what exactly combines them together into one haktorah? With regard to achila, even if they're not muravim zebezel, let's say, for example, you have a half a zayis of yayin and a half a zayis of pas, but he eats them together simultaneously, that's considered one achila. But in the case of Aktara, we're not exactly sure, asks the case of the Keren Ora, is it the fact that he was makter a half a zayis of siyar, let's say on one part of the Mizbech, and then a half a zayis of the matzah on the other part of the Mizbech, he's going to be chayiv for Aktara siyar. And therefore he suggests that simultaneously he was maktir both a half a zayis of siyar and a half a zayis of matzah in the same place. Simultaneously, he was maktir both of them. The Gemara says, "Keman, which shita in the Tanoim does Zeiri's ruling reflect? Ke Rabbi Lazar the Darish Kol." So let's take one approach to this Gemara of the Darish Kol. In the pasuk it says, "Ki kol siyar b'chol dvash lo saktir min Hashem," and when Zeiri derives from the word kol, that het is mitzarf le'isa, in the case of Aktaras chatzi zayis sar and chatzi zayis matzah, he is deriving a drasha from the word kol and the halach of het mitzarf le'isa in Aktaras siyar. Now, Rabbi Lazar is in the Sugim Psachim Daf Mem Gimel. There's an interesting issue here, whether it's Rabbi Lazar, according to one girsa, Rabbi Eliezer, according to a different girsa. But the case there in Psachim Daf Mem Gimel is what's called Taroves Chametz, like Kusach HaBavli, or Shecher HaModi. The Rabbanan hold that if you eat this Taroves on Pesach, then you're not chayiv at all. Whereas Rabbi Lazar holds that you get a lav, you violate a lav, and the Gemara explains that the machlok shin chachamim and Rabbi Lazar depends upon how, or do you darshan the word kol. The pasuk says kol machmetzes lo sochelu. Rabbi Lazar darshans the word kol, and he includes taroves chametz in the lav of kol machmetzes lo sochelu. Chachamim refuse to darshan the word kol, and therefore they hold that Taruvas Chametz is not included in the lav of Kol Machmetz Sol Chelu. And the Gemara there in Psachim on Daf Mem Gimel and Beis in this case says that since we find that Rabbi Lazar darshans the word Kol, the Brisa darshans the word Kol in the pasuk Kol Siar v'Chol Dvash Lo Saktiri Menu, and tells me that Isur mitzarf leheter in Aktaras Siyar. And Tosas wants to suggest that even though the Rabbanan did not darshan kol, we do find that in many places we do derive conclusions from kol. So what does Gemara mean that only Rabbi Lazar darshans the word kol? He says that Hainu, what the Gemara means to say is that Rabbi Lazar darshans this word kol, even if it's a davar she'ein ein svar l'rabosos. Like, for example, in Achilas Chametz v'Pesach or Aktaras Siyar, the Torah says that you chai for kezayis. And now Rabbi Lazar is deriving from the word kol that even if you have less than a kezayis, you're going to be chayiv when the heter is mitzaref le'isa. That's derived from kol. There's no svara to be marba that heter is mitzaref le'isa. And we have Rishonim, and a very long list of Rishonim that maintain that according to Rabbi Lazar, in all Isurim, when you find the word kol, you're going to apply the principle of heter mitzaref le'isa. For example, kol dam, it says in the pasuk Vayikra Gimel or Kol sheretz in Vayikra Yud Aleph, Kol asher ein bo, ein lo snapir v'kaskeses in Vayikra Yud Aleph, lo sochol kol toeva. However, the Ramban disagrees in the Milchamos in Psachim, and he says that according to Rabbi Lazar, in all Isurim, where it says the word kol, just one second. We just get the names right here. Yeah, so what we presented until now is the view of the Ramban and many other Rishonim that heter mitzaref l'isa, according to Rabbi Lazar, always applies when the word kol appears as the enumerated list. However, the Meiri disagrees, and he holds that Rabbi Lezer only speaks about chametz b'Pesach and aktar siyar. Only in these two cases do we apply the principle of heter mitzaref l'isa. Why? He says in all isurim, we need the word kol to be marbe minim chalukim sheyesh bahem, different categories. You have this kind of dam, that kind of dam, this kind of sheretz, that kind of sheretz. They're all included under the lav of dam or sheretz based on the word kol. However, in the cases of chametz v'pesach and aktar si'ar, we don't need to include different minim chalukim. We know exactly what chametz is, we know exactly what si'ar is, and therefore the word kol is redundant to derive heter mitzaref l'isa. Fact the Gemara ihachi, if this is true according to Zeiri, is le'inyan chametz nami, why doesn't Zeiri apply this to chametz where it says kol machmetz lo chelu? And the Gemara says einochi nami. Certainly, according to Zeiri, also in the case of chametz b'Pesach, when there's tarovas with mitzaref heter to isur. And why did Zeiri then mention only the din of haktorah sior? Lafuki me'abayi di omar yesh haktorah b'pochos mikizayis kamash malon the ein haktorah b'pochos mikizayis. Zeiri is telling me a chiddush that's a little bit off the beaten track, meaning as far as heter mitzaref l'isa is concerned, Zeiri will certainly apply that principle according to Rabbi Lozu, Darshan's kol in the case of chametz. But Zeiri had a side agenda here in the halachas of menachos with regard to aktorah, in order to indicate that he disagrees with Abaye. Therefore, he says that heter mitzaref l'isa in haktorah si'ar. Now, in order to understand this, we have to get a little bit of insight into the Gemara in Psachim. The Brisa quoted in Psachim Daf Mem Gimel and Beis says, "Si'ar bal taktiru, ein li ela kulo, miktsaso minayin, Talmud lomer kol, eruva minayin, Talmud lomer ki kol." And now, even though this price is quoted in Psachim Daf Mem Gimel, we have a sugya of Abaye Rava in Menachos Daf Nun Ches. What does miktsaso mean when we have a ribui from the word kol, and what is eruvo when we have a ribui from ki kol? And here we have machlokas Abaye and Rava. According to Abaye, miktsaso means chatzi zayis kishehu be'en. Okay, that's the way we understood it as well. That miktsaso means instead of being makter a full zayis of sior, it was makter only a half a zayis. And a ruvo, which we derive from ki kol, is kishe'eno be'en. So we don't have the chatzi zayis of sor in front of us. You can't point to it because it's already mixed up. And now we get to the shita of Rava. Rava says miktsaso means a chatzi kometz. Now, what's a chatzi kometz? Now, in order to understand chatzi kometz, the Gemara raises the question of what the shear of kometz is. And on this point, we have machlokes between Abaye and Rava. Abaye holds that a kometz for mincha can be even less than 2 zaysim. And now we have a ribui, according to Abai, from the word kol, of mixas komets of sior, and that's also lahaktir, and that means it's even less than a shir of a kezayis. So again, since Abai already has a komets that is subject to aktorah in less than 2 zaysim, then miktas could be less than a zayis. So from the word kol, Abai is going to derive that there's aktorah on pachos mikizayis. And therefore, no matter what amount, minimal amount he's makter of siar, he's going to violate this law. Rav, on the other hand, holds that a kometz cannot be less than 2 zaysim. And when the Torah was marbe, miktas kometz, as we saw in the Brisa, that's less than a full kizayis. I'm sorry. According to Abai, it's because Abai has a aktoras kometz of less than 2 zaysim. Therefore, the kol in miktas is telling me even less than a kizayis. Now we have Rava. Rava says that there's no aktorah less than a kizayis. And therefore, because Rava holds that a kometz has to be at least 2 zaysim, then mixas kometz means it's got to be a kizayis. So we lower it down from 2 zaysim to 1 zayis, because there's no aktorah less than 1 zayis. So therefore, according to Abaye, you don't need a ribui for heter mitzaref le'isur in aktorah sior, because according to Abaye, even if he's makter a kolshu of sior, he would get malchus. So I don't need the heter to be mashlim the shir of the isur, and therefore the ribui of eruv is only that the isur is not batel beheter. But I don't need a tziruf of the heter of the matzah to be mashlim the shir, because according to Abaye, there's aktorah and a violation of Islav even in less than a kizayis. But according to Rav, who holds ein aktorah pchusa mikizayis, so then we need 2 ribuyim. We need a ribui of kol for mikzas haktorah, and then a ribui of kikol for a ruvo. So it means that even though, according to Rava, there's no aktorah less than a kizayis, but the pasuk kol of miktas is going to tell me that he could be mashlim the kizayis to make up the haktorah with a chatzi zayis of matzah, and that's called heter mitzaref le'isur. And then you have the kikol for tarovis. Now Zeiri in our sugya holds that heter mitzaref le'isur and aktorah sior, he could only possibly hold like Rava, because according to Abaye, you don't need heter mitzaref le'isur because there's aktorah in a kolshu and a violation of the law. So I don't need to add the heter. But according to Rava, that there's no aktorah less than a kizayis, I need the heter mitzaref le'isur, an event that he only has a chatzi zayis of sior. And that's exactly what the Gemara means here when it says that the reason why Zeiri in heter mitzaref le'isur specifically honed in on haktorah sior is because he wants to give me a side chiddush, and that is that he accepts Rava's shita that the minimum haktorah is got to be a kizayis, and therefore in a haktorah of chatzi zayis I need to be mitzaref the heter to the isur, and that's lafuki to exclude Abaye, who holds that there's haktorah pachos mikizayis, and therefore according to Abaye I don't need het to be mitzaref l'isur. He's being chayav for aktor of even a chatzi zayis. Yosef Rav Dimi, v'ka'amar lo lahashmata. He was analyzing the statement of Rabbi Yochanan that in all Isuri Torah ein het to mitzaref l'isur. Esvei Abaye. So Abaye raises the following question based on a Mishnah in Tvul Yom. HaMikveh. Mikveh is a tavshil kafui v'av. So it's kind of like a farina, kind of a thick cereal, shel truma. And then he adds spices. He adds shum and shemen. They are the mute. They're the smaller part. And the mikveh itself is truma. So the main body of this cereal, of this porridge, is truma. And the smaller part, which is mixed in, which is the shum and the shemen, is chulin. And it's all mixed up, and it's not nikar. Now the halacha is that Tvul Yom, who's tamei and hasn't yet had hariv shemesh, so he went to the mikveh on that day, but it's before hariv shemesh, and the halacha is that with his maga to truma, if he touches truma, he's posel the truma. And the Mishnah establishes that Nogat Tvul Yom b'miktsaso posel es kula. That if the Tvul Yom comes in contact with part of this mikvah, then he posels the entire mixture. And the reason for that is because the mikvah is the ikar, and the chulin are betelin lo. And in the note here, he quotes the Rash in Tvul Yom that afal gav shahoyu atavshil vashemen vashumurovim zebazeh shayach miktsasan. But it says miktsasan, and it means miktsasan means you have mikveh, you have shum, and you have shemen, 3 ingredients, and miktsasan means one of the 3. And here we have a chiddush that this entire tavshil is considered like one chibur, and if the Tvul Yom comes in contact with one part of it, one side of it, he passes the entire thing. We're not going to say that the shum and the shemen of chulin that are inside the tavshil make sort of like a hefsek between one part of the tavshil of truma and the other part. And therefore we'd say lo pasal makom ago. But now we have another case in the Mishnah. Mikvah shel chulin. The majority of this porridge is chulin. Vashum vashemen shel truma. So the rov here is rov chulin, and the miyud is miyud truma. V'noga Tvul Yom b'miktsasa lo pasal makom ago. Only the exact place where you had contact, that becomes pasal. But the rest of the mikvah remains tar, or shall we say lo nifsala, because its status is that of truma. So Abai continues, he says, Vavinin ba, and we had the following problem, makom ago are my puzzle. If the majority of this mikvah is chulin, then the shum and the shemen of truma should be batel in the mikvah, which is chulin, and therefore even that place where he had contact, the Tvul Yom, should remain lo pasal. It's chulin. We have a right to assume it's chulin because it's rov chulin. And in order to answer this question, Omer Rabba Bar Yochanan, my Tam, why is that makom ago is pasal? Hol v'zar loke oleh b'kezayis. And this is a fascinating halacha that the din of tamei to pasal truma is going to be derived from the Isra Achila of a zar of truma. I mean, 2 different worlds almost, but they all address truma. So if a zar eats a kezayis of mikvah, he'll be chayav malchus, and that's because the Torah does not apply the principle of bittul barov with regard to truma. Rabbi Yochanan is rejecting the assumption of the Makshon over here. And he holds that even though the mikvah is rov chulin, the truma is not batel min Torah. Whereas apparently the Makshon was holding that dimua, this mixture, is only also midrabanan, but Rabbi Yochanan holds it's min Torah. Now, I don't find exactly where we derive this from. Maybe you have it in yours. In any event, since the mikvah has a shem truma as far as chiv malchus lazar is concerned, because the shum and shemen of truma, even though it's only a miud, is not batel, because the Torah is mafkia bit barov with regard to truma. Therefore, we're going to apply the principle in tuma that this entire mixture has a shem truma with regard to tuma, and it passes mago b'mako mago. So let's go over this one more time. The mikveh has a shem truma because truma is not batel, even though there's rov chulin in this mixture. And so too, it has a shem truma as far as tuma is concerned. And now we're ready for Abayi's kasha on Rav Dimi. My time, what's the reason that Rabbi Yochanan says that if a zar eats a kezayis of this mikvah, he gets malchus for the Isur Zaros? He only ate a portion of a kezayis, less than a full kezayis. Because in this mixture, the truma is only a chelek mu'at of the mikvah. So that even though I agree that according to Rabbi Yochanan's logic and the rules that he applies, the shemen and the shum is not batel, barov, because the Torah was mafkir rov in truma, but nevertheless, as far as malchus is concerned, he has to eat a kezayis, a full kezayis of the truma. And here, there's not a kezayis of truma. So we'll just read another few words on the top of Lamed Vav, Amid Beis, to complete Abayi's kasha. Lav mishum deheter mitzaref li'isur. We have no choice but to assume that when mitzaref the chulin in the mikvah, together with the shum and the shemen that's less than a kezayis, and therefore for a zaros he gets malchus. And we see clearly that heter mitzaref li'isur. And now we're talking about the Isur Truma. How could it be that Rabbi Yochanan made a statement that in all Isur Torah there's no heter mitzaref li'isur with the exception of Nazirus?